All right, Shalom. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakwadash. I like to give double honors unto the apostles and the artists of great millstone who are learning this truth from. And I like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. And today, I just want to do a quick lesson on this post that I came across where you just recently had, Tyson Fury's daughter, get married. So it says Tyson Fury's 16-year-old daughter marries her 18-year-old fiance, you know. So I'm just going to, read this post and then bring out a couple of scriptures. Lord willing, this lesson is edifying and straight to the point. And it says Tyson Fury's 16-year-old daughter, Venezuela Fury, married her 18-year-old fiance, amateur boxer Noah Prince, in a private ceremony on May 16th, 2026. At the Royal Chapel of St. John on the Isle of Man. The couple, who got engaged during Venezuela's 16th birthday celebrations, exchanged vows with full parental blessing and a lavish event featuring a stunning gown with a 50-foot train, an emotional father-daughter dance, and support from Tyson and Paris Fury. The marriage has sparked widespread online debate about young love, traveler community traditions, and differing legal ages for marriage across the UK, even as the newlyweds share joyful post-ceremony photos showing off their rings. So, right, this, at least in the ancient world, and I ain't even gonna say just in the ancient world, man, even, I'll say at least, 100 years ago, man, that this was a common thing. And even I'll say at least up to like at least the 40s, 50s. You had, young women getting married at, 14, 15, 16 years old. So this is actually, a common thing. Those of us that know, we understand, because there's not a huge age gap, between the two. They're 2 years apart, possibly 3. But, it says, she just turned 16, and then he's 18. And then he's also, an amateur boxer, as it says. And, Tyson Fury, he's a well-known, heavyweight champion, and if he's okay with, that young man marrying his daughter, then, again, there's nothing wrong. He got the blessing from my father. He sees, Tyson Fury clearly sees that this young man, is fit to, take care of his daughter, because again, things like this are frowned upon in this current world that we live in, where you have, women, young women getting married at that age, man, which again is nothing wrong according to the scriptures anyway. Now, would we recommend doing something like that here in America? No, but as it's been stated, we know the law, that once we get in the kingdom, we're going to get our women young, and then again, it's, it's an extremely likely chance that, she is a virgin. So obviously, she's, this young man is going to be the only man she's ever known, meaning she's the only, man that she's ever dealt with, so just play the, a couple clips, I got the volume cut, because they're playing a couple songs, so I don't want to get the video taken down, and, this is also being used for fair use purposes. I'm not making any money off of anyone else's content. This is strictly being used for educational purposes only. So yeah, man, as you can see, he's clearly, happy that his daughter is being married to that young man, which again, there's nothing wrong with, and it's a common thing, so that's actually, just like it says, at the bottom, a community tradition. So obviously, where they're from specifically, that's a tradition for young women to get married at that age, man. So just get into the scripts, man, not to ramble and not even to make this, a super long drawn out lesson, but just goes to show you that, it's nothing wrong, with a young woman getting married to another man, especially if, her father approves of it anyway, because that's, as a man, that's how you have to go through anyway. That's why arranged marriages was a thing to prevent, your daughter from, becoming a whore. You would marry her off, to a man that you saw fit, and clearly, again, Tyson Fury sees that young man, fit enough to take care of his daughter, so she's going from up under the ownership, because again, you women, don't understand or have a hard time understanding that you are property, you are a possession. You start off belonging to your father, and then once you get married, you then go from, the ownership and protection of your father to your husband, So I'm going to get the book of Sirach, chapter 36 and verse 24. It says, "He that getteth a wife beginneth a possession, a help like unto himself, and a pillar of rest and right." That's, the woman's duty to be a helpmeet, unto her husband, which again is nothing wrong with, that's the woman's role. It's not just to, have sex, and, is the woman's role is beautiful, when she's in her right mind and, she does what, she is supposed to do, be obedient to her husband, hold down the household, take care of the children, it's simple, but a lot of modern women, they have a hard time, playing their role. But, again, we'll in due time. That's all I'm going to say, but again, that's, this is a beautiful thing to see, which, if they're not Israelites, I really don't give a shit, but I'm just saying, just the whole thing, that she's young, she's still in her teenage years, being married off, to a man that's older than herself, which that's how it's supposed to be. You would marry your daughter off to a man that's, established, again, that you saw fit, to take care of her, So I'm going to get the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 36. It says, "But if any man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age, and need so require, let him do what he will. He sinneth not, let them marry." And right, it says when she passes the flower of her age, which is what, when she has her first menstrual cycle, when she has her first period, then that's when a girl then becomes a woman, because, she hits puberty at that point. Now again, we don't push, that we should go out and get, women as soon as they, no, man, that's off. Again, in this current society we live in, especially here in America, that is not a wise practice, but again, this is, what a man is to do, so once, a woman has her first menstrual cycle, she's then ready to produce children. She can then have children, and then again, if she is, in fact a virgin, then guess what, man? Again, he's the only man that woman is going to know. So she's going to be able to pair bond with him, right? And let's look up that word virgin in this verse. So this is Strong's G 3933, Parthenos. It says what? A virgin, a marriageable maiden, a woman who has never had sexual intercourse with a man, one's marriageable daughter, right? And that's all we need, one's marriageable daughter. And clearly Tyson Fury's daughter, she was at a marriageable age, and that's what he did, So nothing was done wrong. So, people are going to have mixed opinions about it, but it doesn't matter how people feel or what they have to say, It only matters what the scriptures say, And again, that relationship is nothing wrong with it, People can get upset about it all they want, but it really doesn't matter, So let me grab this right quick. It's the book of 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, "Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that in any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won over by the conversation of the wives." Now, again, this, applies to Israelite women. Again, they're supposed to be in subjection, to their own husband, meaning, not going around, committing adultery, just being obedient, doing what they're, supposed to do, holding down the household, Verse 2, it says, "While they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear." And then again, that's part of a woman's purpose as well, to fear the Lord, because just like the men, we're supposed to fear the Lord. So are you women, you're supposed to fear the Lord, but that's the main thing. But I read verse 3 and 4. It says, "Whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing of gold or of putting on apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of Yahweh a great price." So, again, finding, a quiet and humble wife, that's actually a good thing. Again, there's nothing wrong with, which it's in Sirach 26, but I'm just going to type it in right quick. Yep. This is the book of Sirach chapter 26 and verse 23. It says, "A wicked woman is given as a portion to a wicked man, but a godly woman is given to him that feareth the Lord." And right, a godly woman, is going to be given to a man of the Lord, as it says, man. Because just like you see these wicked women out here giving, the men that they're with hell, meanwhile, the godly women, the women that are, in their right minds, that are humble, meek, they bring peace, unto their husbands, man, So this is, again, it's a very, very good thing that she's being married off at a young age. She doesn't, have the option to run out and gad abroad, as it says, in the scriptures, man, because what? If you give a woman liberty, she's going to gad abroad, and then she'll end up destroying herself, going around sleeping with, multiple men, and it's just a whole cycle, man. So it's a good thing that she's being married off young, so that way she doesn't have to, go out and do those things, So let's get it. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 13. And, just going into, what a man is to do, right? So it's Deuteronomy 22 and verse 13. It says, "If any man take a wife and go in unto her and hate her, and give occasions of speech against her, and bring up an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid," right? And again, the point I want to make is that, if the young woman is indeed a virgin and she has not, had sex with another, young man, then, she belongs to him. That's his wife, you know, and they're gonna, they're gonna be paired until, again, just like, when they do these weddings until death do us part, right? So she's gonna be, tied to that man until, either one of them perishes. Then like it says in the scripture, then she'll be free, you know, to marry again if she so chooses, or not, right? But this is what would happen if a man were to get a wife and, try to accuse her of being a whore and he knew that she wasn't, right? And this is why, the tokens of her virginity were important, which is going to go into verse 15. It says, then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city and the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. And lo, he hath given occasion of speeches. It's like he hath given occasions of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid, and yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. And right, that cloth meaning, once they consummate the marriage and, they do the act, then she would bleed, and they would keep that, that white cloth, and that's, what I, personally just going to say it's a receipt, you know, because again, that's, the confirmation that, that woman was indeed a virgin if, he went in unto her and she bled, So again, if this, Tyson Fury's daughter, again, is a virgin and that young man is taking her, she's the only man that, that he is going to, or Slakia, a little excited. But if, once they consummate that marriage, again, she's going to bleed because depending on if they even keep, that tradition or not, or if even if they know about it, again, that cloth with that blood on it is the receipt, that's proof that, that young woman was indeed a virgin. So that way he can't come back and accuse this woman with no, she was a whore when I went into her, there was no blood, but that, that cloth with that blood on it was proof, Verse 18, it says, and the elders of the city shall take that man and chastise him, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give unto the father of the damsel, because he has brought up an evil name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife, and he may not put her away all his days. Right? And understand that, you can't just accuse your wife, talking about the Israelites, you couldn't just accuse your wife of being a whore. You had to have proof. Because again, that cloth with that blood on it was indeed proof, or if she committed adultery, then, you can bring up those accusations, but you can't just falsely accuse your wife of not being a virgin if you were the only man that she's been with, Verse 20, it says, but if this thing be true, and the tokens of her virginity be not found for the damsel, then shall they bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones, that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put away, Salakia, so shalt thou put evil away from among you. And right, that's what would happen if, they didn't have that cloth. And the man took that woman, to be his wife, but there was no blood on that cloth, or, wasn't present, then she would be taken and be stoned, But the main point being of this whole lesson is that, again, women getting married off at a young age was a common practice in the ancient world, and even in recent history, in the early 1900s, it was, a normal practice for women to get married, you know, young as teenagers and even, have and bear children, you know. And of course, times have changed. It's not wise to do that particular thing, but again, arranged marriages, is nothing wrong with that, because again, just from the looks of it, the young man, he's on his way up, possibly to even become a pro boxer. We'll see what happens. But, Tyson Fury sees that young man fit to be the husband of his daughter, So it's nothing wrong with that at all, man. So just wanted to do a quick lesson on that. Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakakwadash. I'd like to give double honors unto the apostles and the artists of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from. And I'd like to say peace and salutations unto the hopefully elect. Till next time I say, Shalom.